Great. So I'm glad the link's working.
So if we want to show the video, right now the class is seeing that. That's what they're seeing. Okay.
So Yael is the one who's actually going to be
Doing it.
driving. Yeah.
The question will be, and they should be hearing us too. Like if I test this, they're working on the mics right now.
Can I change my name? Just put administrator or something.
You would do that.
There's gonna be like buttons, right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
right
the little
here.
buttons and you can rename yourself.
There we go.
I'm gonna mute us.
Okay.
Want water?
Oh, perfect. Thank
Okay,
you. Yeah.
of course.
So Jamie, I'm gonna, I guess, come here.
How are you?
I'm good. I'm Bonnie.
Honey, far away or does it-
Yes, hi.
Listen.
You have an advantage over me. You can have notes.
Would you like a notepad?
I
Oh, you
like,
can.
I would like.
All right, there you go.
So how does, okay. Stroke. Am I saying it correctly? Stroke.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Aaron. I am a co-moderator with Jen over here. And what I would like to say, I'm going to read what I wrote because it will be helpful if I do that. But just first off, I want to say that I'm so heartbroken by this whole thing, by the horror that happened in Israel, that the horror that is now happening between Israel and the Palestinians. And I only hope that this moment of ours together can really bring a little more understanding and a little more connection. I'm going to read what I wrote to that effect right now. There is so much charge and so much spinning in our heads, always, and especially about this situation right now. We will dedicate this night to more talk, words, more thoughts, and spinning in a moment. But let's first take a moment to be in our hearts. Our hearts are why we are truly all here. We care, we feel, we are angry, scared, sad. My heart is sad. We are all human. We all feel. Our big brain often clouds our feelings with explanation, justification, and self-righteousness. It brings clutter rather than clarity. But when we can get quiet for a moment, there can be glimpses of clarity. Underneath the noise, there is our fear. We are on a tiny speck hurtling through space. All we have is this rock and each other, and the rock may not sustain us much longer. Robots might be taking over, and we are scared. In the fear, we try to cling to something, to someone for a sense of control, ideas, groups. We like absolutes to hold on to. This is right, this is wrong. They are bad, we are good. It's like a security blanket, our absolute knowing. We cling to stories, we make up to placate ourselves, and for a brief moment feel like we have control. But we don't. We cling to the stories, the absoluteness of it all, and they do not bring clarity or peace. They bring division and war. All the religions at their core agree, life is insecure. It is a mystery, and we do not know what is happening and where it is all going, and we must practice letting go of control, letting go of knowing and trust. It's hard. And this is what we encourage tonight. We do not know. We don't have absolute answers, and neither do you. Let's put down our swords and our shields, our absolutes, our stories of right and wrong, black and white, and live in the nuance, live in the rainbow. There are not two sides to this story. There are infinite sides. The only way through is together. The only way through is knowing that the fierce clinging to our stories is out of our own fear and insecurity that we don't want to admit. Once we admit we are scared, admit we were in it together, we have the potential to create something truly amazing. We are together on this tiny planet. We are all of this planet. It is a body like our own, every part interconnected, feeding and fed by every other part. In hating and hurting others, in othering others, we hurt ourselves. If we focus on hatred and separation, we feed hatred and separation, creating more of it for everyone, ourselves included. Where we put our focus and intention is what we feed and create on this planet. There is no us and them. When we focus on working toward peace, when we embody this, we know there is no us and them, only us. You are now going to hear stories, opinions, ideas, maybe contrary to your own. Thank you for being brave enough to listen, for being brave enough to question with honor and respect and an open heart. Know that the opinions and stories are not absolute truths. They are one perspective, born out of experience, out of fear, out of love. Run from anyone who tells you their story is the truth. No one on this planet knows. We are all groping around in the dark together. These stories are merely small voices in the cacophony of the world, a sliver of reality not claiming absolute truth, just asking to be heard as an equal voice in the discussion. A discussion that can only be a true discussion when we truly listen to each other, when all lives are equally valued. Our intent is to foster discussion, curiosity. It is to open a space that we can begin the conversation, a true dialogue, which means a conversation between two or more people, two or more peoples, a give and take, actively, truly listening to each other. The loud voices in the world on social media are not open for dialogue. They feed off of division, off of absolutes. Their voices are voices of fear and ignorance, feeding off of our fears, inviting us to join the absolutes, holding out the fake promise of security in knowing. Israel, the Jews, are not bad. They are not good. Palestinians are not bad. They are not good. We are partners. Right now, we are co-creating this horror show unfolding in front of our eyes. Again, you may believe things one way or another, that one side is more culpable than the other, but the black and white thinking, the absolute divisions are for fairy tales. We are partners. How do we live together? Everyone's right to exist in peace and security guaranteed. How do we create that? Let's stay open and curious and continue to question. Do your own research to have depth and breadth to your understanding. That is the intent of tonight, to begin a dialogue, to open the pathway to depth that will lead us to where we can co-create a world where Palestinians have the right to safety and freedom, and Israelis, Jews, also have the same equal right. Thank you. I'm going to pass it off to Jen now.
Hi, good evening, everyone. My name is Jen. It's kind of hard to, thank you. Thank you, Erin. I think Erin has beautifully set the tone for what we are hoping to do tonight. I am going to introduce just a couple of the procedures of how we are hoping that we are able to take as many questions as possible. So this is the structure that we've created for this group tonight. In a minute, we're going to give a couple more brief introductions, and then each of the panelists is going to introduce themselves. After the panelists introduce themselves, we are going to open the room for questions. I think the word question is very important. Each question that you would like the panelists to answer will be 30 seconds, only because we hope to get as many questions as possible. So please keep it to 30 seconds. Also, we're going to avoid back and forth tonight. So please ask your question. There's going to be a response. This is the beginning of a conversation. This is not the end of the conversation. So hopefully after tonight, there will be stepping towards more understanding for everybody. 2 or 3 panelists will be chosen to respond to a question. And the main thing I want to say is please make sure it's respectful dialogue. Respectful dialogue is what actually creates empathy, compassion, understanding. Coming here to state opinions is going to further divide us, which is not the intent. Did I miss any question or any structures? I believe that if you have a question, raise your hand. Where's the runners?
There are a couple runners. And they'll just come to you with a microphone and you'll like walk to the aisle and ask your question.
Yep.
We have time, only if we have time, we might take some.
Okay.
Oh, and also what we would like to focus on first is really if there are NAU students here. This is really, we're hoping to engage the NAU students as much as possible. And so like we want the NAU students to have first crack at asking questions. And then if there's time, everybody else. Thanks.
So before we start with introducing the panelists, I'm going to ask Jamie, one of the panelists, to just give a brief introduction of the most recent large event, October 7th, that has started some dominoes that we are going to be discussing tonight. We're not going to start with the assumption that everybody knows what happened. So Jamie, if you could give a brief introduction.
Is this on? Yeah, okay. So I was not prepared to talk about October 7th at all, but we decided that we didn't want to assume that everyone knew what happened. I made sure over the last 4 weeks that I watched every video, I looked at every photo, and I read every article, every post, because knowing what happened is so important. After the Holocaust, it took years to be able to share these stories about what happened, about how horrendous the things that happened to the Jewish people. We didn't have to wait years. The reason why we knew right away was because Hamas filmed everything. They put it out on social media. And so we were actually able to see them almost in real time. And again, I don't have all the facts. I'm just going to share a few things because I think we really need to know. We really need to know how barbaric and how awful October 7th was. But I woke up the morning of October 7th, which was a Saturday, and I saw the news on my phone. And at that point, it just said 300 Israelis have been killed. I reached out, I have family and I have friends in Israel. And so the first thing I did was I reached out to them to make sure they weren't amongst the 300. As the day went on, as the days sort of unfolded, that number from 300 kept going up to 500 to 600 to 700. It's now over 1,400. Over 230 hostages were taken that day on October 7th. The two main places that this happened, the murders, the rape, and the kidnapping happened at the Nova Music Festival, which was actually a peace festival in southern Israel, which was mostly made up of young people. And it happened in neighborhoods called kibbutzim and a city that borders Gaza called Sderot. Excuse me. I'm sure a lot of you have seen the videos of the music festival, but the ones that weren't gunned down right away, they hid in bomb shelters, which then just became somewhere that there was only one way in, one way out, that they couldn't escape. Grenades were thrown in. It was just mass murder and killing. There were a lot of hostages taken from the music festival. I don't know if you've seen photos, but the rape was so barbaric and horrific that you could see the blood pooling on the clothes of the women. In the kibbutzim, if you can imagine, it could be worse. It became worse because there were babies and children living in these communities. There was a baby that was put in the oven and it was baked to death in front of their parents. There were children that were raped so brutally that their pelvics were broken. And they found this out in the autopsy. They didn't just rape them. They raped them first and then they killed them. And when I say they, Hamas. Children were tortured in front of their parents and parents were tortured in front of their children. And again, we know this, we know what happened first because there were videos. They filmed it all and they put it out for us to see. So they would cut off an 8-year-old's arm in front of her parents during torture, and then kill the parents, and then kill the 8-year-old. Like really barbaric Nazi things that happened, and these stories need to be told. Yep.
There's a lot of stories to be told. The reason that we've convened panels is so that there's opportunity for lots of opinions. Well, lots of experiences and lots of responses and lots of questions. To introduce some of our panelists, I'm going to start at the end. I'm only using first names. Pastor Jeff. Jeff is the dedicated and compassionate pastor of First Missionary Baptist Church, where he guides his congregation with spiritual wisdom and a commitment to community unity. He's also a radio talk show host who uses his platform to engage in meaningful conversations on issues related to politics, faith, social justice, and diversity, equity, and inclusion. Jeff is a passionate advocate for DEI, tirelessly working to promote equality, understanding, and inclusion in both his church and in the broader community. So thank you for being here, Pastor Jeff. If you could just take a moment and please do you have any additional opening remarks you'd like to share?
Thank you. I appreciate it. And it's a privilege and an honor to be here. I think what's most important when we have gatherings like this is obviously mutual regard and respect, but I think everything that we do in connection with one another, how we interact with one another, has to start with not just a strong, but an unquenchable desire to be empathetic, to be compassionate, and to allow our understanding to start from that place. Because if we don't care about one another, if we don't see each other as valuable, if we don't see each other as a resource that we can feed into and that we can be fed from, then we tend to devalue and disregard other people, and then their stories, regardless of how horrific they are, they start to not matter to us. It's really easy to turn a blind eye. I would challenge each of you from October 7th to now, how engaged are you in the events? Was it something that you were appalled at on October 7th and 8th and 9th, but by the 10th or 11th, it was just back to life and business as usual? And suddenly the stories, not only were you not seeking them out for truth and answers, but you almost didn't want to hear them anymore. And I understand that that's human nature, but we can't accept that as our nature. We have to be willing to engage one another. And even if we are on complete different sides of an argument because of our ideology, we still have to be willing to engage in these difficult conversations with empathy and compassion. So with that context, I really hope that we're able to accomplish that this evening.
Thank you, Pastor. Next is Rabbi Bonnie. Again, I'm using first names. Rabbi Bonnie is the Associate Rabbi of the Temple in Phoenix. She served as a chaplain in the United States Army Reserve for 38 years, during which time she deployed on multiple occasions to Iraq and Afghanistan. She retired with the full rank of colonel. In 2013, she received a Master of Strategic Studies from the U.S. Army War College.
Thank you so much. And thanks to all of you for being here on this most somber occasion. I listened to Pastor Jeff and I listened to Aaron, and as a rabbi, as a Jew, I want to affirm this idea as we are taught in the book of Genesis, that every human being is created B'Tselem Elohim, in the image of God. The Jewish tradition suggests that only one human was initially created to remind us of that equivalent that we each have as children of the one God. And yet, I can't go with you, Aaron, at this moment to a vision of peace and love and respect for all perspectives. Maybe on October 6th, I could resonate with that. On October 6th, there was what we might define as a cold peace. Everyone was living together in relative harmony, if not in passionate love with each other. But that was thrown out by the horrific, incomprehensible events that Jamie described to us. And anything that suggests that there's any moral equivalence, I look at our question, Hamas terror or resistance, and I'm wondering how that can even be a question at this point. The actions of Hamas are clearly not the actions of a resistance movement. As a United States soldier for 38 years, I've studied the conduct of warfare. And we know that, sadly, war has been part of human life since its inception. The first war is described in the Torah, in the book of Genesis, chapter 14. We're only 14 chapters in, and we're already experiencing the first war. And yet, there has been a sense among civilized people that, first of all, you offer terms of peace. That, second of all, a cold peace is better than any war. Then we had the Hague Convention, where civilized societies said, if you are going to conduct war, you conduct war among soldiers who are wearing uniforms, who are designated as combatants, and you do everything in the world to protect the offenses against non-combatants. This was expanded in the Geneva Convention, who said that members of the armies of other factions are, yes, legitimate targets, but specified the humane treatment of civilians. When I witnessed the killing and kidnapping of children, the elderly, individuals who pose no military threat, I'm appalled, I'm disgusted, I'm horrified at the level to which this enemy has descended, and to the position that they have placed the Israel Defense Forces to now have to go into battle knowing that innocent civilians will be harmed. And I'll conclude my opening comments by just reminding us that the IDF, the Israel Defense Forces, has a very strong perspective on what is called Tohar HaNeshek, purity of arms, that the Israeli soldiers make use of weaponry and power only for fulfillment of the mission and solely to the extent required. And they are obligated by the Israeli government to do everything they can to maintain their humanity in combat and not employ weaponry and power in order to harm non-combatants or prisoners of war. So this is just a scandal that is evocative, again, as Jamie reminded us of the horrific moments of the Holocaust, moments that I hoped, prayed, and imagined I would never live to see again. And it's a tragic, tragic situation we find ourselves in.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi. Next, once again, is Jamie. Jamie is of Jewish, Iranian, Israeli descent, was, here's a fun fact, a Hall of Fame point guard at the University of San Francisco before moving to Israel in 1997. She played professional basketball there until 2005 during the Second Intifada. Well, that's not a fun fact, but Jamie was living in Israel during the Second Intifada. Jamie witnessed terrorism's impact firsthand before returning to the US to earn her JD, Juris Doctorate, and work for the American Israel Public Affairs Committee, deepening her understanding of US-Israeli relations. Jamie moved to Flagstaff 10 years ago and has been involved in numerous social justice organizations over the years and is committed to social justice at her local synagogue and in Flagstaff. Jamie's a small business owner in town and the proud mom of 2 daughters.
Thanks, Ben. So I am an Iranian Jew. My dad spent the first half of his childhood growing up in Iran outside of Tehran. This was decades before the Iranian Revolution. He lived under the Shah, which was a fairly decent government. And for him, as a Jewish Iranian, life wasn't terrible living in Iran. But even so, my dad's last name was changed from a Persian Jewish name to a Muslim Persian name. And of course, this was to assimilate. This was to avoid discrimination. This was to avoid my grandfather being discriminated against for employment so he can make a living to support his family. Again, I don't want to overstate it because it wasn't, living under the Shah was not awful, but they weren't really able to live a Jewish lifestyle freely in Iran. Once the UN voted to establish Iran as a modern state, my dad and his family immigrated to Israel. They left everything behind to come to a country still reeling from war, being attacked from Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, Egypt, and Iraq. There was not certainty that Israel would survive as a country. They came anyways, because the one thing that they did learn from the Holocaust was that no one else is going to come and protect us. No one else is going to come and save us. So living in a democratic, independent Jewish state was the only way to ensure their generational survival. My dad and his family lived in a tent, what was called a tent city, for a year and a half when they first immigrated. During this time, hundreds of thousands of Jewish refugees flooded from Algeria, Egypt, Iraq, Libya, Morocco, Syria, Tunisia, and Yemen. Most of these Jews were ethnically cleansed from their Arab homes. Within a year and a half, my dad's family and those refugees, they were resettled throughout the country in Israel. They had become Israeli citizens. And the reason I'm sharing this story, my family story, with you is because as of today, there are still nearly 7 million Palestinian refugees in the West Bank and in Gaza and around the region. 7 decades after the Palestinian leadership refused to accept an independent Palestinian state living side by side Israel, they are on their 5th generation of refugees. Since 1947, there has been at least 4 offers of a Palestinian state. Each time the Palestinian leadership has rejected these offers. Billions of dollars of international aid has been provided to the Palestinian leadership for the people, but instead of using it to build infrastructure, agriculture, education, it has been used to build terrorist organizations like Hamas. I know there was last Saturday, there was a NAU club, it was a club from NAU that they sponsored a march at Heritage Square. And it was this ceasefire march. And there were many chants that were chanted during this march. Sure, you've heard many of these before. One of the most popular is "From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free," which is actually a call for the elimination of the state of Israel. but that was not the most disturbing chant by any means. The one that disturbed me the most was the chant from Flagstaff to Gaza, globalize the Intifada. And as Jen mentioned, I know a thing or two about intifadas because I lived in Israel during the early 2000s during the second Intifada. And I know maybe some of you students were there and chanting these words, and I know that maybe you had no idea, and then maybe you just thought it meant resistance. But in reality, chanting for Intifada means chanting for suicide bombings, chanting for shootings and stabbings of innocent civilians. The second Intifada was when terrorist organizations like Hamas would convince young Palestinian, mostly men, to strap bombs onto their bodies, find the most crowded bus they could find, or the most crowded cafe or restaurant or dance club, and detonate themselves to blow up as many Israeli civilians as possible. So to hear Intifada being chanted in the streets of Flagstaff, when anti-Semitism in the US is up 400%, should not just concern the Jewish community, it should concern all of us.
Hey, Jamie. Next is Avi. Avi was born in Israel in 1977 near the city of Haifa. He was raised in an ethnic low socioeconomic community town. He moved to the United States to obtain higher education in environmental sciences and sustainability. He has lived in Flagstaff since 2007. Most of Avi's family lives in Israel, both Ashkelon and Gariot. Okay, Avi.
Good evening, everybody. Can you hear me? Pretty good? Okay. I think I'll cut my statement a little bit because a lot of beautiful things and important things have been already spoken. And I'll share from a personal process since October 7th. I was actually outside of the country. I was in London and in a capoeira event, which is an African Brazilian dance form that I teach here in town. And just like everybody else, started seeing notifications on my phone, total horror, but also I'm kind of used to it. In Israel, we have this understanding of if we hear something on the news and one person is watching the news and the other person is in another room, they'll ask how many. That's usually how we kind of wrap our heads around what's going on. And there's some level of acceptance and desensitization of the situation. But I was very conflicted on whether or not I should do this tonight. I was, I'm going through some sort of a crisis, and I think most middle-aged men go through some crises in their lives. And one of them is trying to make sense of my life up until now. Hours of therapy the past few years, talking about my guilt towards my parents for leaving Israel, for leaving them, for not being there. I left when I was 24. My ex-wife is right here. We left together to come here to the United States. And because we cared so much about the environment, we wanted to learn about how can we do something about it. The whole idea of tikkun olam. I'm not very religious, but I do resonate with the idea of tikkun olam, which means repairing the world, and caring for the environment is something that is very deep and important for me, just like human health in general. But initially, when I was asked by Moran whether or not I'd be willing to do this, I said immediately, no. What, are you crazy? I've got no need to convince anybody of anything. I've worked very hard to not care what any of you think. And I recommend that to no end. It gives you a lot of peace. But I'm kind of lying. I do care a little bit what you think, what anybody thinks. So if another important point that for me, just before that, so I was thinking about some people that I care about a lot on this planet, and those people said, we'd be happy if you did this. So I said, okay, I'll do it. Another important aspect for me to share is that I grew up around Palestinians. People like to call them Arab Israelis, what we label things and all of that. That's a little bit funny to me sometimes, that human project is just to organize your own brain. I understand that, but sometimes that's what it is, right? And so I've never grown up thinking about Palestinians as all that different than me, but still somewhat different. I also come from an ethnicity, a Georgian background. My parents were Georgian Jews. There's two tribes that have lived in Georgia, one the mountain people and one the valley near the Black Sea. And 23andMe showed me that I'm 0.2% Chinese and mostly Jewish Georgian, pretty much 99% or 97%. And they always wanted to come to Israel. And they came to Israel just before the Yom Kippur War. And if you don't know what it is, it has a lot of connotation to what happened October 7th. But other than that, what I want you to know, the reason I'm mentioning growing up with Arab Israelis, what people call Arab Israelis, is because growing in a very mixed ethnicity gives you a certain perspective. And throughout my life, I made friends with a lot of people that are Muslim or Arabs. In fact, there's somebody here today in the crowd is one of the most important people in my life, is a Muslim Arab. Deeply care about that person. I don't see them as any different than any other Israeli. I deeply care about other Israelis too. They're very dear friends of mine. Same of people around the world that are from Arab Muslim descent. So there is something to be said about, this is more about ideas and ideologies rather than our ethnicity. In fact, it's only useful for me when we're sharing food and music. Other than that, I don't really care about your ethnicity. I know that for some people who care a lot about identity, where they come from, makes sense. How we have disparities right now, social justice issues, I understand that point of view. I'm just telling you what my point of view is in that regard. If I meet you, I'm your friend if you want to be my friend. And there's something to be said about that. If somebody asks me right now if I hate the people that did what they did in October 7th, I would have to say that I don't. I feel very, very bad for them. I feel very, very bad that they had to have a life experience that culminated in being expressed in that way, as the human being is capable of. And it's things that we hear in history books and even, unfortunately, in movies and things like that, but we don't really believe that that's, how do you bring somebody to that situation? And I do care about that. I do care about that a lot. But most than anything, what I'd like to offer today is answer your questions as somebody who was born and raised in Israel, but moved to the United States. I still visit in Israel. I have family in Ashkelon. My grandmother is under barrage of rockets on the daily. My parents are now in a place that also experiences rockets. Just a few days ago, and I'm talking more than I planned on, but just a few days ago, my daughter, for the first time after many years, wanted to talk to me about the time when I had to rush with her and her mom and her sister to the shelter because there was bombing and rockets, and what it took this for her to process what she went through. More than 2 weeks, was it? Something like that. So we all have these experiences, and by no means do I want to compare my experience to somebody else who's gone through or going through something more challenging. But what I would like to offer today is, if anybody has anything that they really need to tell some Israeli, come to me in the end, and I'll share my information with you. And I'll even buy you coffee. And if you want to scream at me and tell me all of that stuff, I'll let you do that. As somebody who cares about this community, if that's a service that's useful for you, if you want to argue with me, sure, we can do that. Just so you know, I'm here for that. Thank you.
Avi, thank you. I wish I knew how to say, please buy me coffee in Chinese, but
I don't know any Chinese. Only
I'll
ni
work
hao.
on it. Okay, Jake. Jake is a dual American-Israeli citizen and a veteran of the IDF. He is also a graduate student here at NAU in the Doctorate of Physical Therapy program. Thanks, Jake.
Thank you guys for coming tonight. I had a whole speech prepared for you guys, summarizing some facts and events of Israel, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. As all of you, hopefully all of you know, that's not a simple thing to address in a 3 to 5 minute speech. So instead of diving into or touching on 20 or more different subjects about the conflict that each in their own right deserve, hours of discussion, I decided to just share my personal experience since the events of October 7th, and in hope that you guys can resonate with that a little bit and just understand my human experience. So as was previously mentioned, Hamas launched a horrifying attack on Israel, specifically innocent Israeli civilians on October 7th. That attack began at the Nova Music Festival. There's a big kind of like party scene in Israel, kind of like nature parties, forest parties, types of events that I used to go to when I lived in Israel. I have a friend, Eli Baram, may he rest in peace. He was murdered brutally by Hamas at this music festival while just trying to have a good time with his friends. Another friend, Almog Sarusi, who is currently being held hostage by Hamas in Gaza. And an officer from the army, who's one of the first responders on October 7th and was killed in combat. So the events that transpired on October 7th are very personal for me. I feel very passionate about what has happened, and I just wanted to share that with you guys. So after what happened on that day, it's absolutely shocking to me, to some people in the world, to, much of the Jewish community, Israelis. And so the aftermath of that event was very difficult for me I was grappling with a lot of feelings of tremendous sadness for my friends who I've lost. And Israel's very, very close. So if you don't know someone personally who was involved, it doesn't take much talking to find out about, a friend of a friend who was one of the killed or one of the kidnapped. So grappling with those feelings after October 7th has been kind of like a mission of its own, feeling, like I said, tremendous sadness, sympathy for the Israeli people, sympathy for innocent Palestinians that are also being killed in Gaza now too, and anger for how this event came to be. I was stationed on the Gaza Strip for 4 months during my military service, and it's unfathomable how an event like this could have happened, given my experience there and the security that's established on that border. And so to deal with everything that happened, the emotional kind of turmoil that I went through, and experiencing that here in Flagstaff, where we're so far from Israel, so far from what's going on, it's easy to forget that this conflict, this tragedy even happened. And then at the same time, trying to process all that trauma, seeing events that have happened here in Flagstaff, rhetoric spoken here in Flagstaff, specifically at NAU, things on social media that I just want to address. The overall feeling is that after this really tragic and difficult event, I think a lot of members of the Jewish community around the world and non-Jews alike feel this sense of like really not even having a time to mourn what happened. As someone had said here on the panel, this wasn't just, this isn't a resistance group, a Palestinian resistance group. These people came in and killed, young innocent Israelis, like people here in the crowd, young college kids here in this crowd. This is a type of event that you guys would have gone to. And imagine, like, put yourself in that situation of having a night out, dancing with your friends, and then all of a sudden your world is just flipped upside down with terrorists coming in and just shooting anything that's walking and moving. Terrorists who came into these kibbutzim, Sderot, a lot of the areas right outside of Gaza, where it's difficult to even say, but I think it's important to reiterate, babies decapitated, a baby burned alive, women raped until their pelvis broke. These are the type of people that we're dealing with. And to see in Flagstaff calls for an intifada. I spoke with someone from the pro-Palestinian camp just a couple of days ago. There was a protest here on campus, and I was asking her about Hamas. I hadn't introduced myself to her and who I am and what my background is. And she had also defined Hamas as a resistance group. Calls for an intifada, which had previously been mentioned here, the violent nature and background of that term, which I think by and large, college students simply don't understand what that means. And they think that they're calling for something good. And they just simply don't. And then the whole social media world of not even days after the attack, while we're still just trying to mourn our dead, comprehend that friends and family are being held hostage underground right now with God knows what's being done to them. Seeing posts on social media saying Hitler was right, gas the Jews, countless, endless videos of posters around the world of the kidnapped, posted on street signs and walls, and videos of young people with liberal values that I believe I also hold, taking down photos of innocent people being held hostage. I can't comprehend why they think that's justified and how that supports Palestinian liberation or Palestinian autonomy in any way. But just dealing with those events of Israel and then seeing how people are responding here and the things that are saying has been added a whole nother level of how difficult this has been. With all that being said, I think this has taken a lot longer than we expected, and I want to give some time to the Q&A. I hope that there's people from both camps here, both schools of thought about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And I hope to bridge that gap between us and to just create some sense of compassion and understanding. So I hope we have a productive Q&A.
Thanks a lot, Jake. And so we're just going to open it up to questions. There's a couple people running around with mics, and so just raise your hand and they will come to you. And I really want to reiterate, we are open to like all questions, but from a place of spaciousness, of respect. Please just like stay calm, ask your question, and one or two of the panel people will respond.
And also, I just wanted to, since some people came late, because we're trying to get to as many as possible, please make sure your question is a question, and please keep it to 30 seconds or less.
Oh, and just for the panel, just for you all, if you want to respond to the question, just sort of like raise your hand and we'll, okay. Go ahead.
Hello, hi, I'm a student from NAU. My question is, you guys keep mentioning October 7th, but we all know this has been an ongoing problem for decades. And well, from what I've learned from two sides of reading and being informed, Gaza is like an open air jail because it's monitored by Israeli military. And my big concern is I just like been reading more about there's no universities left in Gaza. And as a university student, knowing that other people are not being able to get an education, especially now in Gaza. And I don't know how that, in your perspective, is kind of justified or reasoning to why a bombing of like all universities in Gaza is happening. So I don't know if you could give some any reasoning to that. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, why don't we start with Rabbi and then Avi after that?
So, our former soldier and Avi is your name?
I was also.
Also, so, but
Jake.
Jake, you were stationed outside of Gaza. I think it, and I want to also piggyback on something that Jamie said. So I think it's really important to ask the question behind the question. Why are people not able to receive the education in Gaza that you are blessed to receive here at this moment? Gaza was taken over by Israel and turned back to Hamas, turned back to the Palestinian people. And my understanding, I'd be interested to know when you served there, my understanding is that when it was turned over, there were hospitals and there were schools and there were gardens and there were factories. And it was a beautiful place to live. And all of the funds that could have gone into expanding that beauty and those opportunities and creating a lovely place that we would all like to live in went instead into building underground fortifications, acquiring weapons, and training terrorists. And sadly, in my understanding, that is a strong part of the reason why the educational opportunities that we would hope for are not available.
I think what I would like to say about this, and something that it's an excellent way of thinking about this. What's the question behind the question? I think one of the things in Israel, let's take responsibility first, is that Israelis think we're very smart and capable and ingenuitive, and we think we can solve every problem. Behind your question, there's an assumption there. There's something that's called the bigotry of low expectations. And that means that we look at a group and we assume we'll accept certain things, and we assume that they're not as human as us and they cannot reach the same levels of whatever. And I guess what I'm trying to say here is not every Palestinian problem is because of Israel. Not every problem in the Middle East, even though Arab leaders love to use Israel as the thing to point at when there's a little bit of unrest, civil unrest, is the responsibility of Israel. I've been in conversation with a friend of mine who's Egyptian. We've been going back and forth a lot, 20-minute recordings on WhatsApp. We love each other. Beautiful person. But bottom line is, after I grilled him with some questions, he actually said something that he has believed since a young age. Israel is a plague for the Middle East. It is a destabilizing force. And then he didn't know how to answer to me when I asked him, why is that? And that is something that I believe societies can transcend. And if we want to get to a place like that, there has to be responsibility. There has to be responsibility on both ends for why the situation is the way it is. I don't think that Israel is completely innocent or whatever, but a lot of the rhetoric is around that issue of like, well, if something is not okay, it must be Israel's fault. And that's simply an argumentative fallacy. It's not true.
Okay, thank you both.
Aaron, I just want to quickly
Oh,
say
sure.
to your question about Gaza being an open air prison. And this you may know this and you may not, I'm not sure. But just, Gaza borders both Israel and Egypt. So there's two borders. And as of, before October 7th, up until October 6th, tens of thousands of Gazans would come over daily into Israel to work. Just wanted to make sure that you knew a few of those facts.
There were 20,000 Palestinians inside Israel, October 7th.
Palestinians from Gaza.
Yes, with work permits. Real quick, I actually worked with a Palestinian person that I think about every day. Right after my military service, his name was Mahmoud, and his daughter was killed by the regime that rules that place right now. And so for me, this is not as trivial. I know I was trying to be a little bit funnier in the beginning just to kind of keep things light, but the reality is not exactly how it's portrayed. Look, I'm Israeli. If I want to drive out of Israel, how do I do that? Where do I drive? Tell me.
Nowhere.
I can't drive anywhere. If I want to leave Israel, I have to fly. Israel is not huge. So with that same tokenism, we can say that, and I'm not saying that the situation for the Palestinians is not worse. I totally sympathize. I think about them just as much as I think about my own people. But to push a certain narrative and this whole idea of these people are not capable, or it's BS. It's the hardest working people with incredible culture, and they can do better. And now we're at this place. Yeah, it didn't start on October 7th, but
They just have to pick better leaders.
that's what I believe. But so do we.
And so do we. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
I would also just like to factually state that Israel has not governed Gaza since 2005. So if you're asking why is Israel treating some different than others, I think it's an important fact to note that Israel does not govern Gaza. Okay,
We have a
I think
question.
there's some questions over here.
Hello, my name is Isaac. I'm in the PIA program, graduate student. First of all, we have unbalanced powers. For example, Hamas doesn't have the resources. It's like I heard, it's barbaric military army against one of the most powerful armies in the
Isaac,
world.
could you put the mic a little closer so we can hear you?
Also, can you hear me now?
A little farther away.
Also, what I think it's that with this imbalance of power, they are killing a lot of people. And they are killing, for example, for every you killed in the 7th of October, probably right now it's 100 of people in Palestine there. So I'm not claiming about who's good, who's bad, who has to win. I'm just claiming for peace. And I think I wasn't here in the protest, and Saturday I was in Washington. And as you can see, probably 50,000 people marching because we feel that was the right thing to do. I believe, for example, Rabbi Barney said that we saw that we live in peace October the 6th, right? So if they were living in peace, why this happened? I think that's a question under the question. What's the apartheid that these people suffer? For example, I study borderlands.
So I'm just going to stop you there for 1 sec. Could you just ask a question?
Yeah. Question.
Just ask a question, and then we'll give them an opportunity to answer.
Okay.
What's your question?
So I believe you're addressing some of the question to me. Why did this happen? And I think the answer is because Hamas and Iran were threatened by the peace, cold peace as it was, and wanted to disrupt the diplomatic initiatives that were moving the Middle East towards living in greater harmony and cooperation. And that was a threat to their cause, and they wanted to disrupt that, and they sure have achieved that end.
Are there any other panelists that want to answer that question?
I want to address it from this standpoint, because you asked the question, what was happening on October 6th versus, the 7th and the 8th and what happened after that. I think that we have to be careful that we don't ever take a stance or even start down a road where we justify atrocities, where we justify the
Thank
horrific
you.
acts that took place. We can't do that, okay? We have to always come from a more civilized place. So whether or not we're talking about going into a festival and killing innocent people, or baking babies alive, or bombing schools, the ends aren't justified by whatever our insecurities and fears are, okay? There is still an acceptable, well, war is not acceptable, but there is a more acceptable way to engage in conflict than just attacking innocent people. And I just want to caution everyone here, don't take a position to where you can justify something that you know in your heart is absolutely wrong to treat another human being like that. Don't find a place in your heart where you can justify that.
Amen.
Thank you.
I also,
We're gonna go to this side and then we'll come to that side after. Go ahead. No.
Hi, my name is Ben. It's really nice to talk to you guys today. First, I'd like to just say that I think the attack, it was just awful to see. I'm really heartbroken about it, and I'm really sorry to everybody here that was affected by it. I believe that Hamas is a terrorist organization. I think that the world would be better without it. With that said, specifically to Rabbi Bani, you said in your opening remarks that there was a cold peace between Israel and Palestine before the October 7th attacks. How can you claim this when there's been an ongoing and large-scale effort by Israel to forcibly relocate and restrict resources from Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza, which has led to thousands of deaths and which has been called by the United Nations a mass ethnic cleansing of Palestinians? Thank you.
Well, I'll answer the last part first, which is the United Nations is not my go-to source for objective assessments of the Middle East situation. So I'm in awe and inspiration about the mission of the United Nations. In theory, the reality is that it really does not represent an open and honest and full perspective, in my opinion. I am not here to defend the actions of the state of Israel in the West Bank. I don't think many people in Israel, I'm imagining people on this panel might disagree with the actions of the settlers in the West Bank. I see some heads shaking in agreement, but I think what the pastor said is so important to underline, which is whatever those actions were, would you say that they justify the response of what we saw on October 7th? I think that there were conversations in place. There were negotiations in place. I think just disbanding some settlements, no longer expanding settlements. That was the conversation that needed to take place. I think that that conversation was taking place, perhaps not as quickly as many of us would have preferred, but the way you make peace is by talking to your enemy, not by killing your enemy's children.
I guess, Rabbi, or somebody else in the panel, I'd like to know if one of you would want to touch on the idea of ethnic cleansing of the Palestinians, because that's what part of the question.
Well, I heard my colleagues here talk about Palestinians who were living and working in harmony in the state of Israel. To me, that is not the actions of a government and a people who are trying to ethnically cleanse another group.
Just some statistics. Between 1990 and 2022, the Palestinian population has increased from 1.98 million to 5.2 million. In comparison, when we speak about ethnic cleansing, Algeria, 1948, had 140,000 Jews. There's less than 50 today. Iraq, in 1948, had 135,000 Jews. There are 0 Jews in Iraq today. Syria, 30,000 Jews. There are now less than 100. In Yemen, there were 63,000 Jews in 1948, and now there's less than 50. Of Israel, 20% of Israel is Israeli Arabs. And
We're part of the government.
we're part of the government, the Supreme Court. They serve in the IDF, and I know Jake has served alongside some, and Avi probably has as well. There are a lot of problems in Israel. There are a lot of problems in our country too. Ethnic cleansing is not happening. There is not a genocide happening. There is not apartheid happening inside of Israel.
All right. We ready for another question? I believe.
I want to start first by saying I was the cheerleader at the protest on Saturday. You say that Hamas did nothing but rape and brutally kill children, but what do you say of Israel using white phosphorus, a chemical that gets on your skin and burns you to death? That is an international war crime. What do you say of Israel bombing civilian areas, bombing hospitals, bombing mosques, and now refugee camps? What do you make of that?
Okay, thank you for your question.
Which panelist would like?
Jake, did you want to?
Yeah, that's absolutely horrific. That is a fact that has been used as a tactic in warfare as well. And I condemn that. I'm not here to sit up here and, protect and defend Israel at all costs. What was the second part of your question?
About the hospitals.
Hospitals.
Yeah, so I think you kind of touched on arguably the most complex aspect of this war. It's absolutely tragic that there are innocent Palestinians being killed in Israeli attacks. And at the same time, you have Hamas, a terrorist organization, using these women and children as human shields in schools, in hospitals, in public buildings. And Hamas's intentions with that are that, one, they know that the IDF values life and that we try to minimize that to the greatest extent possible. And so that's why they base their military operations out of these civilian homes. And two, they know that when they enact a terrorist attack like what happened on October 7th, 1,400 people killed, they knew that Israel was going to respond very swiftly, very strongly, and they utilize the fact that they use their military outposts as a way to maximize their own people's death, because Hamas does not care about the Palestinian people. And if it isn't clear to you guys now, Israel's enemy is not the Palestinian people. It is Hamas as a terrorist organization. And by using women, children, as innocent Palestinians as human shields, they know that when Israel has to respond against these military outposts, that they are going to maximize Palestinian deaths, which I think is horrible. And I think most Israelis, most people on this panel would agree with me. And that is a tactic used to create rage among the world of look at what the IDF is doing. Look at Israel killing these Palestinians. And that is a fact. The IDF has done that. from an Israeli perspective, after what happened on October 7th, Israel, and I hope you guys would agree with me, really had no choice but to respond to Hamas. Israel's overall overriding mission right now is to eliminate Hamas completely. I don't know if that's possible. I think it's possible to eliminate Hamas, current Hamas militants. I'm not sure if it's possible to eliminate Hamas as an idea, or as maybe you might believe that they are a rebellion or a kind of freedom fighting group. Just to finish up here, if we're talking about Hamas, I want to state a quote from Hamas's charter, Article 7. These are the people that the Israeli people and the Israeli Defense Forces are dealing with. You can Google this. The day of judgment will not come about until Muslims fight Jews and kill them. Then the Jews will hide behind rocks and trees, and the rocks and trees will cry out, "O Muslim, there is a Jew hiding behind me. Come and kill him." That is in Article 7 of Hamas's charter. And Hamas is not a rational organization with liberal Western values that many people of the pro-Palestinian camp think that we can speak to. There's no coming to peace or coming to any agreements with Hamas when they literally vow to kill every Jew, every Israeli, every ceasefire that's been established with Hamas by the IDF has been broken by Hamas. That's what I have to say to your question.
Thank you, Jake.
Thank you.
One thing I would like to add, this is something that might not be pleasant to hear. Very often we hear about that actions by Israel radicalize people from the other side. And again, bigotry of low expectations. If we think in that way and we swim in those waters, then it goes the other way as well. What about the worries of radicalization in Israel? I've seen it happen. Israel has changed a lot, and I've gone there every year. I have family there. It's not useful for an actual solution unless your goal is to win. If you're only thinking about winning, then power no longer matters to your question. Because if I came and I felt like I had a just cause to start a fight with you, you would defend yourself till the end, even if you knew that I was right. So just that way of thinking, if you're perpetuating that and you think that that's the place where this discussion or this whole situation needs to happen, then this is the result. And I'm not, I have spent maybe more than, I don't know who's in the crowd, but I've spent a lot of time with Palestinians, and there's, again, somebody that I care about and think about every day, and would love to know what's going on with him. But if you don't examine how you think about this kind of stuff and you let your passion only lead you, what you put out to the world, that's what comes back. And that is very, very problematic. I would prefer not to live like that.
Thank you. Okay,
If you could move to the aisle, I think that Eli's trying to hand you a microphone. Thank you. There are many reasons I never became a talk show host.
I'd like to start off by stating that I was also a speaker at the rally on Saturday. I famously, I shouted "Que viva la intifada" at the rally as well. But my question is, during the aftermath of the war with Hamas, Israel cut off the power, gas, electricity, water, and other essential needs to Gazans, which led hospitals to not function anymore. Led Palestinians to have to ration water, and led to a collapse, a humanitarian crisis in Gaza. My question is, what does Israel hope to achieve with the collective punishment of the Palestinian people in this way?
Okay,
Yeah.
I'll take that on. So a few ideas there. You've mentioned collective punishment. I disagree with that. If you actually look at the situation, what we're asking people to do is fight us on the way we want to be fought. It's well established that Hamas stores, steals, and uses energy, food, medicine for its fighters and takes it from the population. If we care about the Palestinians, then we care about the population. And so in that question is, this is not fair. This is not fair. We want that side to win. Well, what I want is the Palestinians' lives to be saved, and I want them to prosper. And I swear to anything that is dear to me that that's what I want. And honestly, I don't care if anybody believes me. But to pretend that that's not going on, or that human shields are not being used, is completely dishonest.
Okay.
And that's really what is pretty much propagated by that question. Go ahead.
Rabbi Bonnie.
So I would just like to also remind us that before Israel made a ground incursion, they warned, begged, and pleaded with the residents of Gaza to move away from the areas that were going to be attacked. Those who attacked Israelis on October 7th, October 6th, I didn't catch the warning to the people of Sderot to move away. We are coming in to fight. I would also suggest that if I were given a choice between having to struggle for food and water versus having my family destroyed viciously in front of my eyes, I would choose to have a struggle for food and water.
I'd like to ask a follow-up question here that to any members who know of the panel. How does the IDF, there's been discussion of the IDF warns civilians prior to any military action. In what ways does the IDF warn civilians, if you know? In other words, if there's no electricity, how are people being warned?
I served in an infantry unit. I was a foot soldier, so I personally wasn't ever involved in any of those types of warnings. But the Israeli Air Force, when, especially in recent events, when they are intending to bomb various places in Gaza, they drop notifications, written text on paper in Arabic saying, we are going to bomb this in X amount of time, evacuate now. And it's no secret to the Palestinians in Gaza that Hamas is using these homes, these schools, these hospitals as places to operate their terrorist activities. So when they get those flyers from the sky, they know what's about to happen. And Israel even goes the extra step by using, I believe they're called like knock-knock bombs, where they are not actually real bombs that detonate, but they make a really loud noise to allow the Palestinians to move.
And is it true also that Hamas stops the Gazans from leaving?
Yeah, absolutely. Hamas's agenda is to maximize deaths on the Israeli side, and they also are happy with maximizing the deaths and suffering of the Palestinian people on their side. They know that if they let the innocent Palestinians in Gaza travel south, travel away from the war zone, that the only people left in northern Gaza will be Hamas terrorists, and it'll be very easy for the IDF to then execute its mission. So in order to make it as complex for the IDF as possible, they are physically denying Palestinians in Gaza to move south because they need them as human shields to prevent the IDF from attacking, and then when they do, to maximize innocent Palestinian deaths.
I think it's also important to emphasize what Jamie called to our attention earlier, that Gaza borders on Egypt. And Egypt has had the opportunity that they have failed to respond to allow Palestinians to enter Egypt seeking safety and security. So that I think is also creating the situation where Palestinians are being imprisoned, was the word that was used.
My question, I would actually ask you then, why should Israel, like, why is it Israel's responsibility to provide electricity and water for Gaza? They have, right, pulled out in 2005. And so and Avi knows this as being a citizen and growing up there, that part of your tax, so Israelis pay an exorbitant amount of taxes. They have free healthcare and school subsidized. A part of their taxes is also going to electricity and water in Gaza. And if we know that there's underground cities throughout, there's Gaza and there's the underground city of Gaza. We know they have electricity. They have social media, right? They're living underground. So my question is, at what point is it Hamas's responsibility to govern their people and not Israelis' responsibility?
I believe we only have time for one more question. I'm not sure which question was next, but maybe
I saw those hands up over there.
I think we have time for maybe a few more, hopefully.
What? No, we only have time for one more.
Okay.
Right there.
Oh, sorry. So I have been listening to you guys this whole time, and you asked us to Google, and I chose to do that. I Googled the Hamas charter, which was updated in 2017, and it does not mention the Jewish people. It mentions
Updated is an important word. I'm
Yeah,
talking about the
exactly.
original charter
Yeah.
of Hamas.
So why would that not be what their mission is now? If that is their updated charter, is not to exterminate Jewish people. It is to reclaim land and to destroy the Zionist, as they call it, the Zionist settler colonial project.
Okay.
How is that different than what you were saying? And why would that make a difference in their methods and in then Israel's
Okay.
response?
Okay. Go ahead. Who would like to answer that question?
Just a
Anyone?
response to that would be, does coming into Israel and killing 1,400 innocent Palestinians or innocent Israelis, sorry, does that help in any way the Palestinian cause, or as you just said, Hamas's initiative in reclaiming Palestinian land?
What? Sorry,
I'm sorry.
it's not a rebuttal.
Wait.
Hi, sorry.
It's a good question. You're asking a really good question. Just to be clear, not only Jewish Israelis were killed in October 7th. Arab Israelis have been killed. Foreign workers have been killed. There's foreign workers and other nationals that were kidnapped. I think the difference is very specific, and it's a good question. I think that those things do matter. If there is a softening in the approach, I think that should be welcome. But essentially, that charter that you think is such a great improvement may mean that my parents, my entire family is subject to violence no matter what. They deserve to die no matter what. So if you think that's a big improvement to where the charter is not calling for the destruction of all Jews everywhere, good for you. I think there's a big, the improvement is not that big. And also just to remind you, there's been a lot of calls by Hamas to attack Jewish people around the world. So they might be adhering to their old charter more than you might want to admit in that case.
And what I would also say is that, like, they may have changed the wording, but their actions are still connected to the old charter. Clearly.
I also heard in the question, and I was clarifying whether or not I could follow up. On the panel, does anyone want to answer whether or not they believe that there is an important distinction between anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism? So perhaps their charter now says we are going to kill, we don't want Israel to exist, but that's not necessarily anti-Semitic. Is there anybody on the panel who would like to address that?
Rabbi, I think everybody's looking at you.
Distinction without a real difference. I mean, it's a fair question, and it's an important philosophical and moral question to ponder. I would say, if you understand anything about the history of the Jewish people, I can understand why some people from the Jewish community don't see the difference. For people who don't believe that Israel or that the Jews are the indigenous people of that land, it feels like, no, this is completely different, a different situation. So to me, I think that we get a little too attached and too mingled in with who's going to win the words game, and whether or not you hate me enough or just for being me, I'm justified or not justified to exist. I don't think anybody needs validation from anyone for the right to exist, and it's the philosophical question. And so I don't know. I've seen that in the media as well, being discussed a lot, and I'm not sure how that's useful right now. I believe in a two-state solution. I always believed in the two-state solution. I believe we can figure that out. I personally, politically believe that the settlements in the West Bank are only hurting Israel. I believe that the Palestinian people, any people, all these arguments about who's right, who's wrong, and all of that, okay, fine. But any people that recognize and identify as a people should have their statehood. They should have their self-determination. The question is if whether or not all of Israel is occupied Palestinian territory. I would question that very severely, and I would debate that. And I disagree with that very much so. And therefore, I think that that's where Israelis hear certain things, some certain slogans that were used this weekend. We just don't believe that you really want to coexist with us. And that makes us think in a more defensive way.
And I want to add to that, thank you, Avi, regarding the West Bank, what many people call occupied territory. There's a huge distinction between, like when you mentioned in Hamas's charter that they've updated it and now it's to take back their land. What land is that exactly? Is that just the West Bank? Is that Gaza? Or is it all of Israel proper? Because I already know the answer to that question. It's to take back all of Israel. They do not want to leave in Israel to exist. And so there's no room to talk peace or to talk a two-state solution with a group of people who deny your right to live in the land that you live in. And that, I believe, is kind of an overriding theme or perspective on the use of the word occupation. Like Avi had just said, I condemn settlements in the West Bank. I think settlements in the West Bank make it even more extremely difficult to generate any type of two-state solution, because if a two-state solution were to happen, the West Bank would absolutely be part of a Palestinian state. But the overall train of thought among the Palestinian camp is that all of Israel is occupied territory. And if you are saying to free the occupation, or the very common slogan I've heard around campus and in Flagstaff, from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. That's referring to Israel's eastern border of the Jordan River to the Mediterranean Sea. That's all of Israel. So if you're chanting from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, you are either calling for the death of all Jews, all people in Israel, or at the very minimum, the expulsion of them from that land. And that leaves nowhere for us to go.
So, and Rabbi Bonnie, did you want to say something really
I
quickly?
just wanted to address specifically the language issue and say that I'm one of those Jews who has moved maybe 30, 40 years ago, I might have said that you can be anti-Zionist and not anti-Semitic. I think that has changed. I think that when people make that claim that they are anti-Zionist, but they are not anti-Semitic, that is a foil and that they are not being honest.
Okay, thank you, everybody. At this point,
I think we're going to roll a short film, is my understanding.
For some reason, audio's not on.
right,
Hang on, Maya can help.
and so this, for the people that are leaving also, this is a former Hamas terrorist who has left the group, and he's going to speak about his experience there, if we get audio. Also, while we're waiting, I just want to let everybody know that there's some pamphlets and some information on the whole situation and what's going on your way out, if you want to pick something up to take home and read, and then to continue your own exploration of this.
Your father. So you've got a great insight into Hamas. Tell me this from the start. What were the intended plans for Hamas when it was founded, when it started, when it developed? What was the plan?
You know, since its establishment, Hamas has one goal in mind, which is annihilating the state of Israel. Like the best, it's a compromise that they could do is having a truce for 15 years, a ceasefire for 15 years as maximum, you know, but with no guarantee how they will act after. It's absurd. It's not a secret that Hamas wants to destroy the state of Israel. They cannot accept Israel or accept Israel's right to exist.
What was the point that you decided to get out of there, to flee this world, this environment you've been brought up in?
You know, I have many reasons. Since I was a child, I asked my father many questions about Hamas delusions, about their brutality, about their abuse of power, and always he justified, you know, their position. Then I was imprisoned with Hamas. I spent about 27 months in Israeli prisons where Hamas was torturing their own members, our own people within Israeli prisons. They killed actually and tortured hundreds of prisoners. And this is when I start asking myself the question, what if Hamas become the ruler at some point? What will they do to our people? And many years later, Hamas became the ruler of Gaza. And I wasn't surprised by their brutality.
When you heard what happened on October the 7th, what was your feeling about that?
Look, as I told you, I'm not surprised by Hamas brutality, but I was surprised by the scale of their attack. You know, not to this degree, wiping out entire communities, you know, messing with a nuclear power, the most powerful country in the region, a country with a trauma, great trauma from the past, with a memory of a Holocaust and all the Nazis did in the past century. They opened the gates of hell on the Palestinian people. This is how irresponsible this group people are. You know, that they are willing to actually sacrifice many Palestinian children, the entire Palestinian people, and use them as a fuel to just achieve.
It is said that the eyes are the windows into the soul, revealing character.
You can skip.
Careless. They don't care for the human life. We have to separate between what's so-called Palestinian cause and Hamas cause. Hamas cause is a sick one. It's coming from the pit of hell. and they need to be removed from power. This is my message as an ex-Hamas member, as a son of one of Hamas founders, that enough of this. If we don't stop them now, the next war is going to be deadlier, and only God knows what will happen next if Hamas is not finished as soon as possible.
Well, so how many regular Palestinians, particularly in Gaza, do you think sympathize with Hamas or indeed fully support them?
Once Hamas is removed from power, we're going to witness people celebrating in Gaza. I guarantee you that. The people of Gaza are oppressed for so long, and they had to endure siege, they had to endure violence, many wars, for the sake of Hamas' lust for power and for Hamas' political ambition. When this comes to an end, I promise you that the Palestinian people, first of all, will thank Israel for what they did. Second, the idea of annihilating the Jews and the state of Israel will be dropped forever. Because Hamas is you can say, the last experiment of adapting violence, trying to annihilate and destroy the state of Israel. This didn't work for Yasser Arafat. It took him 40 years to realize this. And Hamas has been trying for 35 years to destroy Israel. Finally, I hope that they will come to this understanding that Israel is going nowhere. If they insist on annihilating Israel, and of course, if Iran keeps on insisting on this goal, this means the destruction of the entire region. This is the only uncertain outcome of this, because Israel is going nowhere.
How do we get to peace from here?
This time, I'm afraid that war is the only way to peace. Because if Hamas is not removed from power, then they will build more military, they will build longer range missiles, and the next attack, the next war is going to be deadlier. The use of force is the last resort. You can find this in every culture. And unfortunately, now Hamas left Israel and the free world as well, with no choice but to fight them and put an end for their violence. Many civilians are dying, I understand this. Their blood is on the hands of Hamas, and Hamas only.
You see, it's interesting you say that, because a lot of pro-Palestinians who I've had on the show in the last 2 weeks don't accept that argument. They say the blood of the civilians in Gaza is exclusively on the hands of Israel, and that Israel's waged a repressive occupation for many decades. There's been a prison camp for Gazans for a long, long time, and that has created the environment through which a terror group like Hamas can thrive and indeed win an election, as they did in 2005. Do you buy into any of that? I mean, do you think that Israel has overreacted already to what happened to them? Their argument is, what is proportion when you have a terror attack like that on your people?
Look, since my childhood, and I am hearing the stories from pro-Palestine and from those who are using what's so-called the Palestinian cause. They care the least for the Palestinian children and their future. I am the legitimate representative of the Palestinian children. The child within me speaks. I don't want somebody coming from London or somebody coming from the other side of the world to tell me what is the struggle of the Palestinian children. The Palestinian children, the Palestinian society has been hijacked by these criminals, and anybody who takes their side is participating in their crime. This is my answer to those people. And for the civilian casualties, etc., first of all, Hamas is using, and it's very clearly, it's a fact that Hamas used civilians as human shields. It's a fact. Then it's a fact that Israel called and warned civilians to evacuate buildings before they strike them. But in the meantime, Hamas put roadblocks to stop civilians from evacuating to safe zones. Hamas single misfire killed hundreds of refugees taking shelter at a hospital, and they blamed Israel. What are we talking about here? Israel is a democracy. Israel is accountable. Israel is not thirsty for the Palestinian blood. In the meantime, Israel is capable of wiping out Arab capitals in seconds. Why Israel does not attempt to abuse its power? But why, when the Arabs have just a little bit of power, couple of missiles, they misuse power by launching them at civilians and kill them in their living rooms?
When you have these woke revolutions, it requires all of us at some point to say, no, I'm not going to get in with you.
We have a fundamental problem.
I apologize for the technical difficulties. I believe there is one more video. It is very short. It is under 1 minute and it is less intense.
All right, so I have a confession, and I think it's going to be true for a lot of Jews out there, and it's a big lesson for you Jew haters. So I suggest you listen, all you anti-Zionists. Growing up, my Jewish identity was a completely secondary part of my life. I never even thought about it really. You know, my parents had told me stories about what they went through. My mom had to escape Iraq because she was a Jew, and my dad, sadly, most of his family was killed off in the Holocaust. But I never personalized it. It was never something that was super, super real to me. And it was just stories of things that they went through. But then after October 7th, seeing the way the world responded to the attack and the amount of Jew hatred that actually exists kind of woke up my Jewish side, made me reconnect with it fully. And I think people don't realize just how many Jews out there have reconnected with their Jewish identities now. You know, we were disappearing. We were marrying non-Jews at exceptional numbers. Most of us don't follow the religion. I mean, look at me, I'm covered in tats. And now so many of us are activated. You strengthen us when you attack us. We were disappearing. So I have to say thank you to everyone who has reminded all of us Jews what it actually means to be Jewish. Thank you for showing us the true face of anti-Semitism. And thank you for uniting us once again, because I promise you, we're stronger than ever.
So why had there not been a Palestinian
Hi, so thank you, everybody. And thank you. I understand there's like intense emotions at times, but thank you all for coming out tonight. And we really hope that you will continue to learn and explore and try and understand this, because it is a complex situation and there's a lot to understand. And so please keep reading, keep talking, keep having a conversation. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you, guys.
Sit down. Oh, I grew up.
So, you know, we referred you to Deuteronomy when the Israelites were first coming into the land. What were they told? When you come to a town, the first thing you do is.
Good. Hey, Lou, what's going on? Yes, good to see you. Yeah, how's it going? Good, thank you.
Maya, don't leave until I get a photo with you. Ron is here.
Yeah, that.